So today we're focusing on the universal wallet. We've got updates on EDCI and the IEEE ILR Open Credential Publisher, the T3 Network of Networks, OSN. But we're focusing especially on Jackson's presentation on the universal wallet, and Greg is going to discuss the open governance framework. Now I'm going to quickly play our IP statement.
Don't need to do the IP statement here. That's for the IEEE.
Great. Okay. Well, then I won't do that.
Yep. But good news for those of you who have suffered through the IP statements in the past with IEEE. Rob recorded Colin and is able to do it faster, so we can get straight to it. But this is not that. This is open. This is sharing. So I think we're ready to go. Let me just bring up the blog, which we can all, in the meeting invite, there's this blog. I'll put it into the chat to make it easy for folks to get in. And feel free to write, contribute, whatever you want. Just as a reminder for anyone who's new, that this is not an organization. This is just a group of like-minded individuals. We've been meeting in this open format since December 2018 on Fridays for 18 months, and then moved to Thursdays this July. And this is part of what has helped to bring together the alignment and harmonization of technical standards and other resources that's enabling the Internet of Education to develop. And here's links to the doc and site and app and YouTube and LinkedIn, and Twitter and everything else. So feel free to contribute here. Part of what I want to work on, Learning Economy Foundation and others, is to, if people start contributing content in here, then we can start pushing it out as sort of articles and things. So Jan, I think were you here? I forget, is this your first meeting?
My first meeting.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Soyun Song. I'm really happy to be here. Nice to meet you, all of you. I am currently a PhD candidate at Rutgers University, which is in New Jersey High School. And I came to the field actually, and Professor Sam Oh from the AP Lab has introduced me about the project and the work that you guys are doing. And I'm hoping to catch up with all of the wonderful projects that you're working on. So hopefully attending the meeting will help me to catch up quickly and to understand what all the projects are unfolding and how they are unfolding. And so I came to the field of information with my master's in education at Columbia University. And so I love merging the two worlds of information and education. And so I am interested in understanding how information systems and technology and tools and people all come together in a learning environment. So one of the projects that I'm working on with my collaborators at Columbia is to understand learning journeys and how people reflect. And particularly, we're looking at the workplace, and we're currently looking at the context of AI and how the reflection processes change over time. So I love understanding how best to incorporate technologies into the workplace or learning environments or whatever environments they're in. So I'm really excited about the projects that you guys are doing and the collaboration happening with the AP Lab. I see a lot of possibilities and issues to explore. So I'm hoping to, while I'm catching up with my knowledge, with the knowledge that you guys are accumulating, but at the same time, hopefully I'll bring into some fresh perspectives as well. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome. And Catherine, I think you're new to this call. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning. My name is Kathy Casserly. In this context, I'm in the meeting working as a consultant to the T3 Innovation Project. In particular, I'm helping them think about the governance model moving forward as they begin to think about how to spin out from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and what this separate standalone entity will be. I'm very excited for the work that you do. I come from the education space. I was very involved in the work and lifting kind of off the field of open educational resources. I've been CEO of Creative Commons. So this is kind of where my heart sits. And I'm grateful to Greg and to the community here for inviting me in. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome. And is there anyone else who hasn't been to one of these calls before who would like to introduce themselves?
I think Naomi is joining.
Hi there. Yes.
Naomi. Hi.
Hi, everyone. How are you? It's very nice to be here. I'm also with T3, and I won't give too much of a full introduction because mine is very similar to Kathy, but I'm looking forward to learning more about your work. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, well, terrific. So again, people feel free to write into the update. For example, Naomi and Kathy, there's right below, I think 2B or something down right below here. It says T3 network, network of networks, governance. And so if there's any slides or links or anything that you guys wanted to share, just drop them right in there. I guess I just wanted to, again, bring in Simone to you. Can you help frame the EDCI presentation that happened yesterday for folks who missed it? I thought it was pretty impressive.
Yep, sure. I'm happy to. EDCI stands for the Europe as Digital Credential Infrastructure, and it's a new learner record spec, if you will, that is at the heart of a wider platform that the European Commission has been working on. That is, in fact, one of the flagship initiatives of the Commission when it comes to educational strategy. It's part of a number of policies. One is the Digital Education Action Plan, but without getting into too blue sky political stuff, it is relevant for us because it's doing things that similar initiatives are also doing on the other side of the pond. And there's an opportunity here to learn and compare initiatives. And this is really at the core of the work that we're doing within the IEEE ILR work group. Yesterday, so this EDCI is part of the Europass platform, which was just launched on July 1st, 2020. Yesterday's meeting was around the interoperability strategy of Europass or EDCI, and a call out to early adopters. And so the Commission presented the data model again and the different scenarios in which vendors could integrate with EDCI or any educational institutions could really adopt this new specification. The work is impressive. This is what I'm hearing from my US colleagues, and Europass and the folks behind Europass have been engaged with different work streams in the US, and particularly the IEEE 1 and W3C. So we look forward to continue to just stay in close touch with them and have them contribute to the wider Internet of Education conversation. I'll add just one element. So EDCI is a spec for what we would call the payload, so the content of the credentialing. On top of it sits another initiative, which is the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure that specifies, well, how data is exchanged, on a blockchain, which is a European infrastructure that's been worked on. So the analogy is that EBSI or EDCI works on the wrapper, the envelope, whereas EDCI is the payload. So if that is an analogy that we're familiar with. Back to you, Greg.
Yeah, so, again, it's so striking how similar and aligned the work in Europe and the work in North America is. And here's just a view of what it looks like, and kind of drilling into the credential, going through the verifications. Anthony talked about the overall approach to interoperability and how it fits together, and verification checks. So some of the things that I observed that I thought were interesting. This model, and Jim, be good also to pull these folks in also in the conceptual model. This is another good, this comes close to a conceptual model as well, and certainly brings in, I like how they bring in the activities and the different types of achievements and, what they call entitlements and attestations, right? Which is something that I think is less familiar to US context. Or maybe it is, maybe it's just kind of different words, but it'd be good to have a common conceptual model to help align those. William O'Keefe from the EU, I thought it was really interesting when a person from the UK said, can they participate? And William said, well, basically the UK is not really part of the EU as of Brexit time. And so in many ways, UK is now no more part of the EU than is the United States, right? And so, yes, they can participate in the same way that we all could participate. Anthony, certainly talked about nothing would make him more happy than to facilitate cross-content interoperability. So I think, a really good advocate for having European and North American and Asia Pacific work really aligned. One other thing I would just end with is that, interesting how they said they're doing XML, not JSON. JSON not legally admissible in Europe. And I don't really know enough to know the implications about that and what that would mean to our implementations together.
Greg, maybe I can offer an explanation why that is, and it has to do with the legal value of the credentials. And so the commission wanted this new architecture to be legally binding, and the current technologies on digital signatures that we used where the standards were only related to XML, so there was no JSON version of it. That is in the works, and so that's why the decision was taken to use XML and not JSON. That does, in a way, EDCI is a verifiable credential, although it's sort of an XML serialization of it, if you will. But there is certainly interest in converging or mapping into JSON, and the evolution of digital signatures in Europe. It's a framework called EIDAS, is looking at JADIS, we'll call it, which is the JSON LD version of the XML digital signature. So there is sort of a bit of a reason for that, but it's not final. So
just to follow up there, Simone, there is great interest in that. That was expressed in the W3C CCG meeting about the ZIDUS, that conversion, specifically around digital signatures, because that's really the barrier, as you've correctly pointed out. The data payload under it is less the concern than it is the digital signature.
thank you, Phil.
Okay, so I'm just gonna keep moving, and if and if anyone wants to drop in updates into this blog, one of the things I was thinking is a lot of us go to a lot of the same meetings, and maybe it would be nice if we could divide and conquer a little bit more as we stay aligned, and maybe if this can serve as a place where people drop in notes and slides and things from some of these meetings. For example, I missed the T3 Network of Networks meetings, so maybe Kathy and Naomi, do you want to say anything about what happened in the meeting this week, or I don't know, does that make sense? Would you be willing to do that?
Sure, happy to. Did you want to say something right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we had a meeting yesterday, and the focus on it was to think forward based on what the first meeting was really focused on. What value did our members get out of T3, and what would they like to see? What problems would they like to see solved in the future? What activities would lead to them getting the most value in the future. And we collected survey data in the first work group. So the second work group yesterday was really focused on building that into a future governance and for the entity. And I'm happy to share out links to the murals that we marked up. Those murals are open through Friday, and they have a number of notes inserted throughout the images so that you can literally, if you miss a session, look at the mural and read what is the thinking behind each feature for the governance models and comment upon it from your own perspectives. So Greg, maybe that's a helpful thing that I can share, and perhaps
great.
I can share it with you and you can share out to the group in case anyone would like to look at, you know, one of the murals. There's a landing page, and the first mural talks about like principles and mission and a logic model for the entity. The next one looks at different realignment of some work groups to kind of consolidate and focus the work a little bit more. And the third one actually looks at an evolution of potential governance structures that, like I said, has a lot of notes and markups so that you can actually navigate it and comment. So I can, Greg, then share you the link and everyone can poke around in there.
That'd be great. And, you know, if it's easy, I mean, what I would love, what I offer is that people want to drop their links and things right into this Google Doc. And then, you know, part of what I want to work with Chris and Duncan and Taylor on is then this provides kind of a consolidation of important meetings, important things that have happened, and then they can get pushed out as stories through the Internet of Education app.
Very good. Do you have a link to this document in the chat so that I can?
It is in the chat.
Join?
It's right at the top. The second thing in the chat right there. It's also in the meeting invite for anyone who wants to get it after.
Okay, the meeting invite I'll look to. Thanks. And then one thing I wanted to ask about the last conversation about the Europass meeting yesterday. Simone, you were talking about the future developments with EDCI. Did it raise any thoughts in your head that they said they thought the regulations would be 2 years down the road? They kind of said, you know, 2 more years down the road. They said explicitly, we're interested in being on the curve, not ahead of it. And I thought that was an interesting position. And I wanted to see if that, you know, raise thoughts for anyone else in the group.
Naomi, I think Anthony was, if I'm not mistaken, referring to sort of this alignment with JSON LD signatures, so that would allow.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the pace at which the commission moves, you know, being sort of a giant. So things do get, you know, they get done, you know, eventually, but not right away. That said, I think there's an opportunity here for the two communities, so the European one and the North American one, let's say, or the global one, to say, hey, why do we have to wait? Why don't we just take the XML version, JSON LD, and just the community works on creating a mapping? The same goes for EDCI as a learner record specification that will be very popular in Europe from now on, to say the W3C verifiable credentials. That's already there. I mean, there's already a link, a genetic, deep genetic root that is shared, but you know, say the past XML transcript or the IMS comprehensive learner records, that is something that I'm trying to solicit and just bring people around, saying there's no need to wait. There's enough expertise, willingness, and rationale to do this right now. And so just the mapping of standards is already something that T3 has been doing, you know, with Credential Engine providing a tool for doing it. So, you know, all this global community should come together, and there should be mapping, I think, done and published openly to do this crosswalks.
So I want to keep us moving along, because I want to have, you know, approximately 20 minutes on these 3 topics. So other updates that could be made, certainly what's going on with Dakota and the Open Credential Publisher, updates from OSN. I just dropped this in here with a link in case anyone's interested, you know, and this I think might be a good segue over to Jacksón, you know, so data breaches, right? Centralized data stores are inherently dangerous honeypots for data breaches, right? So what's the antidote to that? Universal wallet. Jacksón, do you want to take over?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a good good segue in terms of security for the 22nd century education systems of the future here. So, all right, okay, I'm going to share my screen as well. into Keynote. So where I wanted to begin was really at the layer of the Internet of Education ecosystem. You know, at Learning Economy, we really like to talk about the 5 utilities that are foundational for the future of education and work. And so I'm going to walk through those utilities and then really dig into kind of the update on where the Universal Wallet is at. With the first utility, you know, essentially this whole utility is geared towards creating a GPS ecosystem towards skills and careers where, you know, as easily as you can drop yourself in downtown Boston and find the best cup of coffee and 12 different routes there, you should be able to do the same with your lifelong learning goals across your entire life. And so, you know, to get there, though, we need several utilities. The first of which is equity networks, which is sort of, you know, it's utility 1. I almost consider it utility 0, as in without this, a vast, you know, swath of the population will be left kind of behind. And so this is prior to the wallet. And then when we get to the wallet, you know, this is where this presentation starts today, which is really, you know, what is a wallet? You know, I'm going to kind of start from 0 and then kind of get people up to speed at where we're at in terms of what we're working on with the Universal Wallet. Can you see this?
We're still on the first slide.
Okay, you're still on the first slide. Okay. Sharing is paused. Resume share. One second. Momento. Can you see this?
Yep. Digital wallet. Jackson, if I can, you know, coach your presentation a little bit. You know this group. This is a very technical group.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, you know, we want to move quickly through the core concepts and get very quickly into like, where's the GitHub, where's the spec, you know, how do we participate, you know, what's, you know, if Tracy wants to use your wallet, how does he get involved? You know,
yep.
like,
and
how
that's
do we
coming right here. It dives deep quickly. So I don't know why it's not letting me do full screen, so I'll just stay here. So in terms of, you know, what is a wallet? You know, the reason that I do start here, though, is that this is part of the technical conversation that's happening. And it's a technical conversation that's been unfolding in the W3C CCG groups over the past few months that we've been participating in. And really, you know, where we see it as what a wallet is kind of converging to, we've kind of been vetting this understanding of it for a while, is, I mean, it's a safe for your valuables. It secures, you know, in a very practical way, it secures and stores digital data and assets. You know, referring to the slide that you presented, Greg, instead of having, you know, data stored in, you know, in a school's LMS system, it allows you to store data at the edges in profoundly secure ways. And so really, a wallet does not define what's stored inside of it, right? But it's everything considered important enough to be stored in it. It does not define those data boundaries. And to us, this wallet is, you know, foundational for ensuring 22nd century dignity and freedom in this new world. And so a lot of that discussion happened in the CCG. So I can link to a blog post if anyone's interested in kind of looking at some of the ways that conversation evolved in terms of different understandings of what a wallet could be. So in terms of the update of where we're at is we have split out universal specification of the wallet and implementations of the wallet. And so right now, one of the W3C CCG working groups, sort of pioneered by Ori Steele over at Transmute, but then merged and co-owned now by Learning Economy Foundation and DCC with MIT, is essentially looking at the essential verbs of a wallet. You know, what does a wallet do? And in terms of, you know, any wallet that anyone can access, you know, what is kind of the shared terminology that we should be evolving? And so this is a really excellent space to look at those verbs, discuss that terminology, and kind of converge on a wallet that crosses the divide between verifiable credentials, but also currencies. You know, when we talk about a learning economy, this idea that not only can you be earning credentials and use those as a currency, but that as you learn, you can actually also be earning currencies. And that these two worlds can actually exist in the same space, because when it comes to the technology, the learner identity and the digital assets that you accrue associated with that are all one and the same thing. And so this is a universal specification that is bridging what have up until this point been, widely disparate groups in terms of the conversation. And so it's brought them into one space where a lot of this conversation is unfolding. And so I can put a link to that interoperability spec into the blog. And so, what we've been working on as well and incubating inside of that W3C CCG group is this idea of a universal wallet source development kit, which would empower any developer, any organization to bake into their existing applications or into new applications that they build, the ability to have a learner who can earn tied to their identity, not separate, not in its own silo, not a vendor specific deployment, so that even if you're earning credentials in at UC Boulder in Colorado, those same credentials can be stored in the same wallet as what you're earning on Khan Academy or what you're earning elsewhere in Lego, which I'll show you in a second. And so what it really does is it is driven by standards first, in that this is not moving faster, it's not moving past what's happening in the community, but rather it's kind of lassoing all of the mature standards and creating an easily deployed, kind of easily accessible package that you can allow your developer team to work with to engage with your application. We're currently building it through use cases. It's very easy in this world to get pulled into kind of chasing ghosts, if you will, if it's not grounded in reality. And so we're baking in the development timeline, at least as we're contributing to it, all of the various pilots that we're working on, which I'll kind of show you a couple of those here. And it's user-centric in that, all the core tenets of self-sovereignty and learner identity kind of apply. And so, with that, the whole thing is built on this modular architecture. And so it's not specifying, this is how education data is transported. It's not saying this is exactly how you need to use this wallet. Rather, it creates a really streamlined way for you to drop in the hard stuff, the cryptography, the data storage, the key management systems, the protocols for verifying, issuing, and presenting credentials. And so, and in addition, it's pluggable. And so, if you want to build on top of the Universal Wallet SDK, you can see yourself kind of as a domain within this. And so, here's the SDK, here's how you can store your learner identity, here's how you can issue a credential, here's how you can receive a credential, and your application can talk to it in those ways without needing to dive into the harder conversation of, okay, well, even if you understand those protocols, how does your protocol interact with other wallets in this ecosystem? So if I'm a learner in Colorado and I'm earning credentials with Lego, but I'm also earning credentials with my university, how do these all play in the same sandbox? And what happens if Lego goes out of business? How do these credentials continue to have currency for me throughout my entire life? And so this is the architecture that we're working on. It does not define the data boundaries. It's pluggable, and it has, it bakes into its fundamental assumption that the storage of credentials and keys can be both local and remote. And so that is a really active part of the development there. And so it has, a lot of the verifiable credential handlers. It has core functions that we see as universal across all the different wallet use cases. And it has diagrams kind of demonstrating how the wallet interacts with the application. So if you have, a My Colorado app, we're working in Colorado with the digital driver's license there. If you have that app and you want the digital driver's license app to be able to show all of your learning credentials across your lifetime, here's how it's going to interact with this. And so a lot of the SDK is both helping convey these processes and protocols and then allowing you to take advantage of it without necessarily thinking about under all of the kind of dirty underneath. And so this Universal Learner Wallet, MIT and the DCC consortium just got a government grant to double down in their contribution to this side of this through the US Department of Education, which is really exciting. Learning Economy Foundation, we are massively investing in this, and over the next few months are ramping up our efforts to that extent. And specifically to one of our use cases aligned with that is this Super Skills Lab, where we're working with the LEGO Foundation as a contributor to the open source initiative over the next 10 months to essentially build out one of these kind of first examples of a really production K through 12 geared way for kids to essentially have their own digital wallet, kind of help them understand what it means to have a learner identity in a fun way, in a way that they can go on quests that are learning, building paper airplanes or, building Legos or what have you. And as they go on these quests, they're actually able to earn credentials and skills that they can see. And it's a very tangible and visible thing. And so as they earn creativity and leadership, we're doing a lot of work with Gregory to understand how that relates to the Open Skills Network and some of these other ontologies. All powered by this universal wallet architecture underneath it. And so LEGO will be one of these first kind of use plans that fits along our master plan to solve the SDGs for 4 and 8 by 2030. In addition to that, we're working on a number of grants with library systems and IMLS around the country. This is both in Maine. This is a way to help bridge that last mile divide of folks who otherwise would have access to credentialing and skilling, but don't because they don't have a stable address, they don't have a stable identity. And so we're working with library systems to essentially issue a universal library card. This idea that you can give one library on one part of the state a descriptive address. I live next to the bridge over here. And that descriptive address can empower you to have this universal library card that has a currency across the whole state. So no matter what library you walk into, you can access the computer resources, you can engage in upskilling, you can check out books potentially, and that's all tied with you and moves with you for your whole life without needing any kind of rigorous state ID. And so it really kind of changes the game in terms of that last mile problem. And so all sorts of really interesting pilots going on. I'd rather kind of open this up for questions, but really the clarion call is come build with us. We're building it. We're doing the open source side of it. We're building out implementations and deployments. MIT and DCC are doubling down their investments now as of this month as well, which is really exciting. And we're always looking for more talented developers to help us. And that's both on the open source side, but also potentially on the ecosystem side in terms of areas and ways to deploy this to support the full ecosystem.
Awesome. Jackson, can you just, I'll open it up, but can you just is there a GitHub? Is there a developer site? What technology stack are people developing in? Can you get a little more into the nuts and bolts like that?
Yep, definitely. So Phil had a question too that's kind of relevant to what you just asked. Is this platform dependent? Is this a mobile device or app, or is it equally implementable in a cloud app context? It is not platform dependent. It can be deployed both on a mobile app, in a mobile app, or in a cloud context. It is actually fully WebAssembly driven. And so anywhere WebAssembly can run, which is a little bit technical, it can run. And so that can run in the browser, and the browsers run most places, and it can run outside of that. In terms of the development stack, a lot of the languages that we're working with right now are Go and JavaScript, and a lot of the web kind of world, all the decentralized identified standards, as well as knowledge of JSON and JSON LD. And really anything that's evolving in the standards world right now is a relevant kind of aspect to the development stack. If the latter, where points 1 to C, understand where different platforms raise, where points 1, understand the different platforms raise unique questions, problems, opportunities. So building off Phil's question, he's asking, it's not platform dependent. So which platforms are raising particularly interesting issues? I mean, so one specific question, Phil, that we're actually working with right now is the best way to create. So we're kind of, so currently native apps, on iOS and Android, they operate in a sort of sandbox environment. And so one of the challenges that we're currently working on is a way for apps to safely convey that they have access to a shared surface of data. And so we're doing some really interesting kind of research into this idea that, instead of relying on the file system, or instead of just relying on some of the kind of native dependent functionality of any individual phone, that we're actually could create kind of a peer-to-peer network between your apps. And so that they could signal through intents and some of these other things, what data and access, permissions have been granted, and broadcast. And so anytime that, one wallet wanted to access all of the contents of the other wallets, it could kind of send out a broadcasting message to query across a number of apps, both on the phone, but also remote. And so you could have a resolver that sits in the phone and knows how to route towards all of the sort of local context, but also remote context. But again, the application wouldn't have to think about that layer. And so in the same way that, a lot of the decentralized world decentralized our client server relationship to peer relationships, it kind of purifies our app relationships.
So that allows effectively you to do subsets of apps, subsets of credentials on your mobile device, for example, and a larger library stored in other places.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of having, I'm going to have my wallet app and everything else, is you can have everything kind of accessing the wallet as it needs to with correct permission controls.
Got it. And I asked earlier, but I'll just repeat it here for clarification. So the primary functionality at the app end is dealing with a verified credential that's been created and issued by somebody. And signed by somebody. And then in the app's perspective, it takes in the verified credential and then does the management of it to stack, associate, create the presentation signed with whatever disclosure choices for proofing. Is that happening at the app level as well?
Yeah, so any domain-specific logic is happening at the app level, and that's a very specific choice. Because we want to make sure it's only evolving with the matured standards, and most application domain-specific logic, that's where the innovation's happening, and so we don't want to just standardize that preemptively.
Right, but the issuing of a verified credential is happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what we're working on with Tracy.
Exactly right.
The publisher, right? So we're, and Jackson, I still want to get you and Chris and your 5 and Art and his 8 and, into one thing, right? And sometimes it's different, different perspectives on it. So but we want to, I think like what you talked about equity access networks of, access points and all of that stuff is definitely outside of the 8 of the components, but we want to move if we can towards a common framework so that we're able to get the exchange of things.
But one thing it does imply is that learner assert, one of the characteristics of at least some of the credentials is the ability to have the learner actually assert a self asserted credential, which means that at some point that app is going to have to do the actual verified credential creation itself. If you envision supporting that capability.
Yep. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. And
yeah, can I?
Go ahead. Yeah, one last thing I was gonna say too, and sorry, my my previously kitten, now cat, is really excited about Ed 3.0, so he might be meowing saying hi here. Is currently too, a lot of this is housed in sort of an incubation phase in the W3C CCG group, but we are exploring different pathways through the standardization process, potentially, Greg, through IEEE, and then on its way through W3C official standard and ISO and some of these things.
And ISO, yeah. Yeah, and I'll say one thing before you jump, Greg. This is Chris Purefoy, the chairman of Running Economy Foundation. So again, the SDK, the spec for the universal wallet, it speaks nothing of the application layer. So I would say 2 things. One, so we do want your help with this. Anyone that wants to help with this open source effort, please reach out to us. We'll connect you in. We'll get you into the GitHubs. We'll help, help empower you to be a part of this effort. And number two, we are deploying a piece of that, as you spoke about for Lego. That's actually happening on the We library side. We have a social, a social benefit corporation type of thing, where we're taking some of these open source technologies and we're deploying them so they're really, reliable and scalable, et cetera. And so we're doing kind of one-click deployments of this starting the first quarter of 2021. So for anyone who's interested in that type of thing as well, reach out to us and we'll help to get you plugged in.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to pivot us to the final topic of the for today, which is governance. And here, Kathy and Naomi and everyone, good to get you guys involved. So in the spring, again, let me back up. This phone call, Ed 3.0, started December 2018. Not a group, just a bunch of people coming together, as we still are. But there's some certain topics that have emerged this spring. Topics around diversity and inclusion and governance really rose, is on all of our minds, certainly in America and across the world, that more needs to be done in order to create true diversity and inclusion, and particularly in the fields that, and technical fields, what we all discussed together was that there is what some of us started calling the participatocracy, which is basically organizations that are run based on who shows up, right? And that meets our principle of open participation. But what we saw is that it becomes often at odds with our principle of diversity and inclusion, right? And so how do we balance those two? How do we remain open, inclusive, transparent, but how do we also have it be more representative of all of the stakeholders who have a stake in these things? So what we, Jacksón helped us with a lot of this, and my attempt to distill at the end was really what we need to do. It sort of came down to, we need to just intentionally appoint a board, right? And we talked about how, in certainly in America, we have this thing called a jury, which is randomization of decision makers, which is something that we would trust more. You wouldn't want your guilt or innocence to be determined by experts, lawyers, right? You want to have this idea of like the lawyers present, and then there is this jury of peers that is neutral and representative that then decides, right? And so that dynamic, I think, is what we want to try to structure. And so Naomi and Kathy, this is where, I would hope that T3 network ends up taking us, which is, it can't just be the participatocracy. If it is, then we will have continued dominance by certain corporations and certain categories of people, and it won't have the legitimacy that it needs. To put this into place, Simone and I have been talking for a while with Colin as well about, so we have this sort of IEEE process, which is definitely a participatocracy. It is about who shows up. In fact, you have to show up 3 of the last 4 meetings in order to vote, and then the quorum is based on how many people meet that requirement. It is entirely about showing up that determines your vote. And again, what we see is that it is a particular segment of the population that then votes. So what we're suggesting is that a facilitator, in case of IEEE, Simone, would either create a randomization like a jury, which would be a little hard to do in this context, or more likely just intentionally appoint a governing board. And that governing board would be more representative than the participatocracy would yield. And so just as an example, and I just put this out here in gray because I haven't talked to these folks, but just as an example, we could imagine a 6-person board that would be half male and half female, that would be split equally between the 3 major time zones, and would bring a level of mutual expertise that could be trusted. So say Nate, Otto, and I are on a bender fighting about whether it's the 2-object model or the 3-object model for ontologies, right? And now what we're trying to do in IEEE is to say, wherever we get to one of those feuds, that for the most part, we're going to say, okay, well, both are legitimate options, right? We really want to avoid those types of conflicts and say, either where there's a consensus, state the consensus, where there isn't a consensus, where there's more than one option, then state that there's more than one option. But to the degree that there needs to be decisions made, who would make those decisions? Is it just the people who showed up? Or can we convene some type of a governing board that would have legitimacy to break ties? So I offered these 6 just as an example, and I'm going to delete them, delete that because, I haven't even talked to these folks yet, but it's an example. So Simone has here a link to a Google Sheet. And Simone, do you want to talk about what process you want to go through for this?
Well, so I'm not much of a process guy, but I do agree with Greg that, so as we're going through this IEEE standardization process, we are, I guess, trying to stretch some of the ways also that these initiatives are handled. And on this one is on governance. And so we need to stay within the protocol of IEEE, but also make sure that we try to innovate a little bit within some constraint on how we do things. So the idea is what Greg explained. And for me and for the whole group, it's super important that this is an effort that is representative of diversity, of regional diversity. Typically, a lot of the movers and shakers in this space are in North America. That's a fact, right? But there is equally a great work happening outside of it. We've just seen the example in Europe. And so those contributions are super key for the process. And we want to make sure that this board is representative. And so it is important that we just think hard on, who could be sitting on this board, quote unquote, even people that are not the usual suspects, but they could play this independent role, yet they have to kind of understand the issues. People that have been on these calls for the past several months are now familiar with the terms, the concept, the vision, the conceptual framework, and the components, but not everyone is. And this is a challenge that we have even in the IEEE calls where people show up maybe from Europe or for the first time, and they have to digest a lot, and not all of it is super clear. So it's a fine balance, but I think it's possible. So I encourage you to just think about names. You don't necessarily have to have warn these people, but just to freely brainstorm on people that could fit the role. Thank you.
So here's a link, and people can either email or send or go directly send nominations to Simone, and then he is going to then attempt to sort of impanel a balanced board that can have legitimacy to break ties and make decisions where decisions need to be made. What do people think? We need to open it up. Naomi, Kathy, you guys just had a meeting about this. Is this fit with what you guys were talking about? Is it,
I'll just jump in. I don't think we're quite at this point. We're beginning to think about what the elements should and could look like. Naomi can talk more about the structure of like the organization, but we haven't talked about the people, and I think the depth that you've already gotten to. I'd just like to comment that I do like this a lot. I think we have a lot of structural issues and systemic that you've identified that have precluded the representation that I think we all want in lots of different ways. And until we try new models and break these models, I think this is the way we have to go. And I think my other comment is, and I don't know Simone, we've just connected through LinkedIn and through this conversation, but it seems to me that the community has to trust him a great deal if he's going to be the person who's putting forward the name, he's taking and collecting. So you need that neutral, honest, trustworthy broker, representative, or collection of people. And each person, each of those 6 people have to carry that kind of credential with them. And that's really, really important, because when that breaks down, the system will collapse. And so I think this is just a really great example to look at. So I appreciate being part of this conversation. I don't have much more to add at this point. I will be going through the documents over the next few days that you have and just kind of catching up because I think there's a lot there. So thank you.
Catherine,
Yeah.
do you mind me adding your name to the list? That's how it happens. I did this for Greg, by the way.
Let's have a conversation about that next week. How's that?
Yeah, and
Thank you.
And what I would add to what Kathy shared is that we're also thinking about what is some of the required representation on the board, some of the segments or subsets of people that we need to reserve space for, the same way you have geographic location and you have gender and expertise, and you have that kind of concept reserved. One thing that I'm also thinking, and you may consider this as well, that rather than centering the appointments on a person making the decisions, what we will probably look into is criteria developed around our organization's core values that enable nominations to basically prove qualification according to a set of criteria that are aligned with the organization's values, so that it's a little less subjective, and it can be a little bit more of an objective process in terms of, you know, who is qualified to sit as a representative of the board. And then to some extent, instead of just nominating people where that will happen in the short term to keep the board nimble and the process quick, we may have we will evolve from nominations to from an appointed board to nominated candidates according to a set of criteria, and then an election of the candidates. So you're kind of like getting the best of the best, where there is a hybrid of a little bit of a appointed set of people or a nominated set of people by a neutral representative, but you also have that member participation in terms of selecting representation that best suits them. So it's a little bit of blending 2 worlds and not completely leaving one behind, but also recognizing that pure democracy and voting does not really work. At the same time, benevolent dictatorship is not where we want to be either, or an oligarchy. So we're kind of, you know, trying to find that middle ground on how you can make a representative democracy that preserves certain elements, but structures them and still allows the membership to have some choice.
Others want to jump in? Open mic, 5 minutes, chat, speak.
I threw a question in the chat.
Sorry.
So nope, that's okay.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Lisa. Yeah, so maybe I can help with that. So this governance board is really out there to decide, to try to build consensus over what recommended practices around the learner record ecosystem are going to make it into this IEEE standardization effort around integrated learner records, which were formerly known as, or actually interoperable learner records, and now known as learner and employer records. So this is a standardization work that is happening within IEEE, and we are now in a phase. We just started, and we are calling for contributions. So this is the phase in which we are, and so we're inviting people or organizations that have either established or emerging practices around learner records and its ecosystem to present and to share. And then at some point we'll need to converge. And so at that convergence point, we'll need to find ourselves in just having to build consensus over different practices. And this does not have to be mutually exclusive. I'm sorry. Two different approaches could coexist in addressing one thing. And so we are happy to have those in the document as well, but we expect that there needs to be some, a bit of governance put into that. And Chris has a stack in the chat. So
I just want to clarify, because you missed the beginning of this meeting. This meeting here is not that. The second Thursday of the month is what Simone just described, and it goes by IEEE formal protocols. But every week, this group meets informally, not an organization, just people coming together and collaborating, right? So we're coming together informally, collaborating, talking about a more formal process. IEEE happens at this exact same time, second Thursday of the month. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to add more. This isn't necessarily answering any of the questions, but I wanted to say that what I really appreciate about this call today, as someone that's heavily involved, with the IEEE work, with the W3C work, and with T3, I think that this is really a good space we're finding ourselves in, right? I mean, I think that the idea of moving towards governance, moving towards, unified standards, et cetera, it's going to require everyone working together. And I think in a lot of ways, there's been a lot of fragmentation in those efforts, but I'm seeing it all start to come together here. And I think having T3 and like more involved in what's happening in IEEE is just absolutely critical. And again, with IEEE being kind of a recommended practice pointing to all of the different standards, it kind of represents the bridge. And so I just want to say, I think this is really encouraging for, and all the right questions are being asked, right? And I think everybody's approaching it correctly. So I think if we just stay at it together, we're going to get there.
Awesome. Let me just end by saying, again, one goal here is maybe we don't need to all attend 15 of these meetings every week, right? And maybe we could start dividing and conquering a little bit more, and then having some place where we're sort of reporting back in. And that way, in an hour, you could attend 10 of these meetings that are happening each week and get a little update from T3 and a little update from OSN, and kind of, we can find the integration points easier. So I don't think that's going to happen overnight, but to the degree that this provides a forum for people to drop in presentations and meetings and things and share them with people who weren't, I encourage you to do that.
One thing you could do, Greg, is with this meeting, possibly have a spot on the agenda, either at the beginning or the end, where people who are involved in the other streams and have something remarkable to say can have a minute or two to give this group an update.
Yep, absolutely. That'll be the standing. That's what we did in the first 20 minutes, and we'll keep that as a structure where we welcome people, we get updates on things, and then we have probably 2 meeting topics each week.
The difference between that 20 minutes and now would be to have it as a standing agenda item and actually have fairly complete coverage and maybe a somewhat thinner briefing, so that people would know what to do to follow up if they caught something burning.
Yep, I like it. Awesome. Well, I'll see you guys all at the other 14 meetings that we are all at each week. Bye, everyone.